Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Well, here we go. Look at that. It is April the 10th, Thursday at 8:32 as we record this edition of On the Ledger Ontario Politics podcast, and not in my usual perch here. We're coming to you live from Iqaluit this morning. We're here working on a project that is going to result in I think a fairly significant podcast series about the Arctic. We started talking about it a year ago, and it was a nice idea. With everything else that's going on, it's going to be rather timely. So as this plays out, we'll be sure to detail more of what's coming. But the show is called The Arctic Edge, and you can find it right now wherever you find your podcast. The trailer is up. We're going to officially launch it tonight. Sean Boyd is the chair at Agnico Eagle, and he's the driving force behind this commentary. So he's going to unleash it this evening in an official launch. But for those of you listening earlier than that, feel free, jump in, put your name on the list, and we'll make sure it lands in your inbox, because it's going to be a really timely conversation about sovereignty, about minerals, about important minerals, about how we get the minerals out of the ground and to market, etc. And some of the government involvement in all of that. So a little bit of the conversation certainly we've had around the Ring of Fire in Ontario. So The Arctic Edge, find it on your podcast app, and that'll be fun. All right, let's get around the table. Here we go. And Kathleen Wynne is here with us, the former Premier of Ontario. Keith Leslie joining us from his haunt in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, longtime commentator at Queen's Park. And you see and hear him on CHTV. Our founding veteran pollster, John Wright, is here. Plenty to talk about with John and the numbers. And Tim Hudak is the former PC Ontario leader and a partner at Public Affairs Council. Sorry about that.
Public Affairs.
Council of Public Affairs. That's what happens when I'm, that far away from you all, Tim. Here we go. So you know what? It seems though it's almost like the clock is ticking, and Wednesday is some form of incredible chaos on the tariff front, Tim, because every Thursday morning we've done this podcast for the last month or so. We've been reacting to and I heard the phrase they used, it was called malignant stupidity in the White House.
A little harsh. This made me think quite a bit. I did when I was in my early 20s, had the opportunity for a career in customs brokerage, coming from the border town of Fort Erie, have an economics degree. And, then I happened to get elected, 21 years in politics, the CEO at AREA, Council of Public Affairs, met you wonderful people through all of that, married my beautiful wife, 2 great daughters. But I'm thinking, Dave, if I had done the customs brokerage thing, I'd be making a lot of money right now. Trying to sort through all these tariffs, what does it apply to, and auto parts versus autos, and might be a pretty lucrative career being the person at the border, figuring out what rate applies what particular day. Now, I heard nobody laugh. I am joking. Life is good.
No, we're good. We got it. We got the joke.
Can you imagine every day trying to sort through this? So, look, it is a roller coaster. We temporarily were hit, but not as bad as everybody else. Now, that's true in some areas, not true in other areas. My advice remains the same: to play the longer game, calm, cool heads, reciprocate with retaliatory tariffs appropriately. Don't go over the top. There will be tariffs at the end of the day. I am confident of that. But what can we put on the table as a country that'll be good for Canadians ultimately? Give Trump a bit of a win, but get us inside that tariff wall if it ends up at 10%, 25%, or even higher for China.
Yeah, John, I guess a week ago after Liberation Day, we were all kind of, oh, great, we were off the hook, and everybody was kind of patting themselves on the back and exhaling. And then I heard people bitching yesterday because, well, they didn't help us out. Well, we weren't hurt in the first place, relatively speaking. So to Tim's point, you got to really take the long view on all of this and try and figure out exactly where you fit in the middle of all the chaos.
Yeah, Tim's absolutely right. It is a little bit like playing the stock market, as anybody would, right? If you're going to retire, you want to make sure that you play the long game and not the short game. What's happened, however, is 2 things. Number one is the distrust of the United States, the unpredictability of the United States. the erosion of its status in the world as a player who can be counted on is pretty much evaporated. I think what is going to help Canada is talking about stability, ensuring that we, in fact, remain as cool as we can, as stable as we can, an open door to supply chain. Continue on our path to diversify both within the province and the country, but also to look far afield to see what kind of relationships that we can have. I mean, that was the mission before. I think we have to stick with it. There's no telling that within the next 90 days what will happen, or whether or not the president will take the spring off again and all of a sudden it hits up like a jack in the box. So we have to be prepared now. We've witnessed the first time when all of the countries in the world were affected by something that was perpetrated by the most powerful man, the most powerful country, and the most powerful economy in the world. And you know what? We now know the kind of damage it can do. Now, China is another issue that is going to affect the world in so many different ways as well, including ourselves. But we've got to keep our eye on the ball and make sure that we remain flexible, open, and stable for others to invest in and for us to do deals.
Kathleen, Wynne, when I was listening, though, to the commentary afterwards, all I saw was pretty much what Tim and John had summarized in terms of, okay, we were ready. We had our retaliatory rates, and we were going to hit back if need be, and there was strategy there around the world from world leaders. And then on the other hand, Mr. Trump patting himself on the back, saying 70 countries were banging at his door willing to kiss his ass, in his words, to make sure that they avoided the tariffs. The reality he lives in is a strange one.
Well, it's an unreality, Dave. It's, the one thing that we know, we've known this, but I think this is just a validation of that this is an unpredictable, unreasonable leader. And so we have to just stay the course. So I have two things I want to say about that. The first one is that we have to stay the course. I think what John and Tim have said is absolutely right. We have to continue to be ready. Yes, we were ready. We have to continue to be ready. We have to sort of be relentlessly calm in the face of this volatility. But the second thing is that it gives me some heart that somebody or something got him. I mean, he can say, or they can say it was a plan and, this was the strategy. I don't believe that. I believe that the wild dip in the markets, I think the corporate leaders in the country must have been saying to his people and to him, this is insane. We have to make it stop. And so that actually encourages me that while we're going to continue to live with this volatility and unpredictability, at least there must be voices who are talking to him and trying to put some parameters, some guardrails around this craziness. So, I think it's stay tuned. We're on a roller coaster, but there's a little bit of a glimmer of the real world getting through, not necessarily to him directly, because he's on the golf course with that terrible shot, that terrible drive. But that somebody's listening to the pain that the economy is going through.
Yeah, I was in a recording session yesterday, Keith, for about 2 hours, and we had various people here in Iqaluit that we wanted to talk to, and okay, we finished it all up. We packed up the gear, we walked out of the room, and the guys at Agnico saying, what the hell? Just the spin around it. And one of them said to me, there was an adult in the room today. It had to be an adult in the room.
Maybe two.
Maybe two.
But certainly someone got through the president. But I'm not sure that I agree with Premier Wynne. I think it was all part of the plan. I'm beginning to buy into the conspiracy theories that certain billionaires were indeed tipped off and knew that this craziness was going to come and they could make some, more billions. And apparently some indeed did do that. I don't know if they did on inside information or just sheer luck of being a billionaire. You can make billions more in almost any situation. But it does lead us all to believe that, especially that Monday morning when the rumor went out, there's going to be a 90-day pause. The market shot right up. No, that's not true. The White House denied it. The market fell right down again. That's pretty direct evidence of how quick the manipulation by words from the president can hit the markets. After the Tariff Day, Liberation Day last Wednesday. Thursday, Friday, the markets just tanked. I mean, it wasn't a roller coaster. It was a one-way downhill tank. Monday, again, they were tanking until that little bit of a rumor about a 90-day. No, completely denied until, again, we get to Wednesday. Tariff Day again. I guess Wednesdays are Tariff Day now. And he imposes that 90-day. It sure does sound like, it was all part of a plan that was deliberate, intentional. I mean, why they would want to wipe out, trillions of dollars of market value, I don't know. Clearly, some CEOs were really, really angry about this whole situation as well. But what about the oligarchs, the billionaires, the people that are really paying this guy money? He's got his $5 million gold card with his face on it now. You want to buy your way into the United States. It's all insane. And yet, I think what we're dealing with here is something that, maybe next Wednesday is Tariff Day again. Will it be Liberation Day or will it be, Bondage Day? Who knows at this point? Was it the bond market? We don't know. And how do you deal with all this? And we're still getting warnings from his inner circle. Lutnick said that the retaliatory tariffs Canada has already put on, if they're not replaced, we're going to get treated like China is and look at, maybe 104% or 124% or whatever it is on China this hour.
Tim, when all the noise was out, though, we lost $6 trillion in value. To turn that around, somebody made money that day, a lot of money that day in that sell-off. At some point, if they were selling at high rates, they were making cash.
Suppose I'm mad at myself. Like I'm not billionaire money. I'm not billionaire money, but I have some sitting in cash. Yep. And I so badly wanted to call my broker and say, put that in Monday morning, because clearly what Trump had announced was not going to be sustainable. Mm-hmm. You saw the pushback was post-mortem pushback in the domestic political market in the States. And I didn't do it. I was so mad. But he didn't call me. He didn't tip me off. It seemed to be evident that the aggressive, across the board, all at once, was not practical. And I think here he's just arbitrary. Maybe he talks to people, say, I'm thinking about 35%, like an auction caller, and then makes his decisions out of a gut feel. But hopefully we'll get to some point. I don't think we will for a while on the differential. I'll go to the federal campaign in a moment. There's just some odd things, right? So if I got all this straight, we still have 25% on steel and aluminum. Now that is universal. We do on autos as well. However, that's going to be discounted depending on U.S. parts. Canadian parts are currently duty-free into the States until May 3rd, when they'll have a study trying to figure out American versus U.S. Foreign manufacturers have that 25%. So a couple things. We actually have a small advantage right now for Canada compared to everybody else. Hopefully, whoever's the next prime minister can secure that and expand that avenue. I do worry that countries like China will look to dump products, particularly steel, aluminum vehicles, into Canada. So how do we deal with this? My last point, Dave, for my colleagues, I don't think Poilievre made the right move by attacking Prime Minister Carney yesterday, saying he didn't get a good deal for us. Because on the evidence, while confusing, we're still better off than other nations. I don't think that's a point of attack on Carney. Poilievre should stick to his other differentials. Maybe that was a reaction in the moment, not in clarity with all the facts, but saying Carney didn't get us a good deal, we actually, and the Canadians will perceive, we actually do have a bit of a leg up relative to our competition.
Keith, the argument and the criticism of the Poilievre campaign has been he hasn't been talking Trump enough. But when he does, he talks about it in the short term, to Tim's point. So it becomes a bit of a stumbling block.
Well, he was mixing two different things there, wasn't he? He was sort of pretending that the 25% tariffs weren't on us and that we didn't get the 10% that everyone else. It just wasn't, as to Tim's point, I think is bang on here. It just wasn't the right form of attack. He's got enough. Use them. He's got enough in his arsenal already. And I think Poilievre's campaign, the whole thing, has been so policy heavy that they need to stick with that. Stop or lay off the attacks on Carney per se, and just go with, every day he's got a new policy. They're well thought out. Some of them have some broad appeal to a lot of Canadian voters, I think. But he gets sidetracked in these other issues. I know he's been advised to get a little tougher on Trump, but don't try and confuse the facts. Canadians know where we're at in this trade deal. It's unusual, but we know where the tariff situation is. So I think, trying to cash in that way is not the way to go. It's to campaign with your policies, push them out, push hard, and perhaps, I don't know, be a little less antagonistic with the media. I mean, I know, he's smiling more when he keeps them 30 feet back and behind a pen and one microphone, no follow-up, no getting on his campaign planes or buses, physically getting physical with the media. All of these things are just such distractions that are unneeded on a campaign when you're running to be prime minister and you just really want to be on the high road all the time. And he's getting all this blowback. He won't take a single question from the CBC. He only takes 4 a day, one local. That's okay. I mean, I've been on campaigns before. I remember being on Jack Layton's campaign. The number of questions every day we had to negotiate amongst ourselves because they were very limited. This is not unusual, but it's in how you treat people when you do it and how you respond to things. And it's just, as I say, these are just needless shooting yourself in the foot when you just have a lot of policy there and you should be campaigning primarily on your new policies every day.
Well, John, we're at the end. We're winding down the end of week number 3 here. And based on all of that commentary around where the campaigns should be right now, and particularly the Conservative campaign, they have to pretty much knock Carney back into their range in terms of polling because they keep bumping their head up against their peak, don't they?
Well, here's where I think they may be. And I haven't bought the T-shirt yet that says, "Do you believe the polls?" But I got to tell you,
says the pollster.
I think but there has to come a point in time in your campaign where you really evaluate whether you're going to get your vote out.
Mm-hmm.
And they know that they can get their vote out. 72% of those Conservative voters of the 38% are completely locked in. And we've witnessed that in terms of the rallies. I mean, that is easy to do with 14 million people in this country who are very committed to one political party, who are very angry, who've been talked to for the last 18 months to 2 years about how bad, the leadership in this country has been. And it's been crafted around those messages. I think reflecting on this, if you saw for about a week, Pierre Poilievre tried to play a different role. He softened. He opened his tie, his shirt. He had his wife and kids up on stage. There was a different tone to it. And then, of course, there was a lot of infighting within the Conservatives. My guess at this point is that somebody's looked at the numbers and said, look, only 62% of Liberals are locked in at the moment. We have 72% of ours locked in. If we can get people out under the tent as we do, then we can get them to the voting booth. Maybe the Liberals can't. Maybe you're going to see the NDP wedged and some of them go back home. So if we get some momentum going in and off of the debate for our people, not necessarily the next group that we would have to have, we're starting to play then the odds. It comes down on one side, it goes up on the other side, and that may in fact be where they're headed. But the world's kind of unpredictable. You think of what's happened south of the border and the consumer inflation, which is out this morning. I mean, for everything that you hear, you would think that inflation would in fact be up in the United States. In fact, it's down. It was in February, it was 2.8. Everybody said it would probably on the predictions be 2.5. It's now this morning 2.4. I think, you got to be careful in terms of how you play the percentages because you're dealing with a different racetrack. But my sense is, I think they've headed in that direction where instead of, if you start to soften, if you start to do things that are just outside of your range, you're going to get a lot of heat from the base that you've courted for the last 2 years. People, they're going to sow dissent amongst their group about polling and about a series of other things. But when I saw him take on the Reporter in the last 24 hours, I thought, you know what, we're back to the apple eating Reporter day. And it just seems to me they've decided that's where they're going to go.
Yeah, Kathleen, I can't think of who thought it was a good idea to start quizzing the media gallery on the size of his crowds.
Yeah, I'm not a pollster, so I'm not going to be able to speak intelligently to the number strategy. But I've been out knocking on doors in 3 ridings, and now. Granted, we're working from lists that are probably liberal, but in one of the ridings, we knocked on every door. And I can just tell you that particularly the women, their impression of Pierre Poilievre is pretty baked in terms of this guy is just not somebody who I trust. I don't like him. And I'm not going to vote for him. So maybe he can get some of those people back, but it seems to me that really kind of mean-spirited, petulant personality that that kind of got him into this trouble, because as soon as Mark Carney became the leader, that opinion started to shift away from Poilievre. I don't know how doing the same thing, I don't know how challenging Laura Stone and trying to back her into a corner. I don't know how that helps him with people who are trying to decide whether they'll come back to him. So far be it from me to try to interpret the numbers, but I can tell you on the ground, the calm of Mark Carney is appealing to people. And I think that, with this latest move south of the border, this increased volatility, even if there hasn't been a huge slap against Canada, as Tim said, there's such uncertainty, and we really need a calm hand. We don't need somebody who's going to, be petulant and sarcastic in the face of the kind of challenges we're dealing with.
So, Tim, is the strategy now, and I realize that the debates will be the fulcrum here. I mean, this is where we're going to see, that's the turning point, one way or the other, whether you like it or not. Is their strategy make sense to say, sit tight until the debate, or do you test something between now and debate to see what plays?
I think you stick to plan. John Wright outlined with his expertise how plan has solidified voters, and now you look to expand. So, if I were in those shoes, I would continue to talk about the need for change. Their advertising is trying to connect Prime Minister Carney with the Trudeau record. Do you really want a fourth term of this? I think they did a bit of a minor pivot to connect it with Trump by saying basically we need to make Canada stronger so we're not so vulnerable to Trump's policies. And here's how our policies do that. So I like that, connect the dots. I am confident he will do very well in the debates. And it takes time for this stuff to settle in. I think Prime Minister Carney had a very strong honeymoon. I think the campaign they've run has been very strong as well. But Dave, to throw a bit of a curveball in there to suddenly pivot, I don't see what that lane would be. My gut would be stick to plan.
Can I just ask Tim, Dave, can I just jump in there?
Yeah.
Because you said expansion, Tim. So what's the strategy to expand given how he's behaving right now? I don't get that. Who's he bringing in with the behavior that, as John said, he's gone back to in the last few days? Like, where's that expansion possible?
So sometimes, human beings, whether they're in the moment in the spotlight or their campaign teams, will make errors. So I'll challenge the notion that there's been some strategic shift to, return to the apple biting, caustic side. I suspect something may have happened to go wrong, but I don't think that's a strategic shift. I think they will go back to plan. So what is the expansion? Well, the laneway is there. I mean, change is very strong. Those who want change will overwhelmingly vote Conservative. I think you just need to keep pushing the change notion to try to get that as much of a ballot to get by and get your voters out and execute, as opposed to having it as, who's going to get the best deal for us from President to Trump. So if you can expand who's paying attention to that ballot, the voters come with you.
So you think that petulance that he demonstrated was a mistake? It was kind of his essential 7th grade boy coming through again, right?
I wouldn't use those words.
Just answer yes or no, Tim. Yes or no.
Look, I've known the guy since he was first elected. He was helpful to me. I like him personally, but what Premier said about women particularly, I see that in my own household. There's an abrasive nature of the personality that causes some voters who would normally be there to walk away. But my gut would tell me, I've got no insight. I'm actually heading to True North Strong and Free and Cardis conferences. I'll be among a lot of the federal campaign team. My guess is that was just human nature as opposed to his new strategy.
But it's not one day, is it? It's several days. And to Dave's point about the crowd size, the one advice he's getting from within the tent is stop being so Trumpian. Stop connecting yourself with Trump. And asking Laura Stone in the Globe and Mail about crowd size the day after he's had a rally of 10, 12, 15,000. I mean, whatever number he wants to put on it, he can put it on it. We're not going to challenge him on that number. It was clearly a huge rally. And he's talking about his crowd size. Well, who else talks about their crowd size? Then when he's up in the Sioux, again, he's talking, like calling a reporter who's trying to get a follow-up question in, even though the microphone's been yanked away. And he says, I'm being heckled by a protester. There's like 4 reporters. There's only 4 there, for God's sake, and he knows that one had just asked him a question previously, turning around and calling her a protester. Come on. Well, this again is just the wrong behavior in the middle of a federal election campaign, a very tight, short one, where it's become a two-way race between you and the current temporary, or I don't want to say the current prime minister, who was elected Liberal leader.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just the wrong behavior.
For the reasons you lay out, Keith, I agree. That's why I don't believe it was a strategic move. I don't believe it was a pivot. I think
it's his true self. I think to the question, is it his true self coming out? I mean, is this just who he is?
Well, I mean, he did roll out, something that would resonate, especially in semi-urban areas looking for change. That's a tough on crime. 3 strikes, you're out. I like that message. I expect a lot in my universe would like that message. So I think they're still executing plan. And all 4 of you, I think, would agree with this from your experience in politics. Sometimes political scientists, are more off than weathermen in understanding issues because they think everything, relates to theory or to policies. Sometimes it's just good old fashioned human beings who had a bad day or are feeling under pressure that go off strategy. And that's my guess here.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I want to go back to the numbers for a moment. And again, I have no idea what the Conservatives are saying inside the tent. I only see what has spilled over, just like lots of other people. But there seemed to be about a week there where there was a change. And it was, the pivoting, to the softer, to the more thoughtful. Like you could see it, like it was there. And then all of a sudden, and that the attack on the media, just kind of put that aside for a moment. But you can see the aggressiveness again, 3 strikes, you're out, all that sort of stuff. And again, if I was looking at the numbers today, and if they were real, you'd be looking at a Conservative leader and saying, you're not going to get a majority. That's for damn sure. Because if the polls stay the way they are at 34% to 38%, you've got to be above, 3 or 4 points above the Liberals in order to do that. Then you're really going to have to make a move. And I don't think that's possible. Also, you see where the regions are. I mean, my goodness, they really have, taken all the way back to Saskatchewan and Alberta to where their core is. And they don't have, even a plurality now in any part of the country. So part of this would be to say, if you're going to go forward, at least get your own people out. I wonder whether or not they've got to the point where they're saying, hold them to a minority. Hold them to a minority so you can fight another day. You're not going to be like Andrew Scheer or Aaron O'Toole, who, get in there and get knifed and get thrown out, but you at least can earn your way back to the House of Commons. Now, look, I don't know any of this for sure, but if I were looking at the numbers, the only other thing that I would say is Mark Carney's personal numbers on leadership have gone way up, and Pierre Poilievre's have come way down. So, I mean, the difference is that you've got almost 50% of the people in this country who are saying Mark Carney's the leader that I want for prime minister. And you've now got a diminishing return, in some cases going down to about 28% or lower for Pierre Poilievre. So we've got one leader going down this way and one leader going up that way. And if you're going to get into a situation where the ultimate ballot question is who is the right person to lead the country going forward, both on vote and also on character, Pierre Poilievre is not winning. So what do? Use the debate, go back to your core, get them motivated to get out, hoping that the softer vote does not show up and that the NDP, are going to rally a few points at the end. So, I mean, it's a plausible strategy. I don't know whether or not they're actually talking that way, but if I look at the numbers, that's kind of where I would be.
Well, Kathleen, that would fall in line with what Jagmeet Singh was saying yesterday. Our objective is to hold them to a minority, and we want to have a voice in that minority government. I'm not quite sure how credible that is, but there seems to be that's the default position. They're not talking about winning, and we said that last week anymore as far as the NDP is concerned. The scramble on there, hold them to a minority. The difficulty is, when we look at some of the polling I've heard, he's in trouble in his own riding out in Burnaby.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the hold them to a minority strategy, if that's what the Tories are doing, and, John makes a strong argument, whether that's what they're executing on or not, it makes sense. It's way less tenable for the NDP, I would say, at this point. I mean, we know that that's where a large proportion of the Liberal vote has come from, is from those NDP Conservative, those switchers, right? They've come to the Liberals. So I think, I think Jagmeet Singh is in a really, really difficult position. And the analysis I've heard that makes the most sense is that they are putting, they need to put their resources into their incumbent ridings and just do what Marit Stiles did in Ontario and hold those seats. That's what it seems to me makes the most sense. But again, I'm not the strategist. I'm the horse they put out to knock on the doors, right? Remember that.
Well, although, when you start to look at the seat projections from some of the modeling platforms, Keith, whether it's 338 or the CBC or the Toronto Star, they're all within, pretty much the same range. The Star, remarkably, seems to be less optimistic for the Liberals in terms of the total number of seats, still a majority as they go. But there are some of those projections that are talking about the NDP only winning one seat in Ontario.
Yeah, I saw that one. I mean, they're talking about them winning 11 or 12 seats. Well, they need 12 for official party status, so they're not fighting to keep the winning party to a minority. They're fighting for their lives. They're burning the furniture in hopes of saving the House. And what they absolutely need to do is concentrate on 12 ridings they know they can win, get the couple of big unions that they have supporting them, coming out, knocking on doors, and really trying to save as many seats as they have. They just don't have time now to be campaigning in areas that they aren't going to win. They need to really batten down and just get right to the core seats. Now, the same predictions were set of the Ontario NDP, and they managed to come out with almost the same number of seats they had going in. They did way better than people expected. They're way better than the Liberals did in seat count, not in votes, but in seat count. So it depends. The NDP are very efficient in some areas in getting their vote out. So I think they should be able to save official party status. But when they're below 8% consistently in the national polls, I mean, they're off in the periphery with the Greens, and it's just we're just not even going to count them at this point. So that's really scary stuff. I mean, I know this has become a two-party race for the most part because of the existential threat posed by Trump and the tariffs and the whole 51st state thing. But to see the NDP vote collapse that much, and it's not just in Quebec where they only had one seat at this time anyway. It seems national. They have some real issues. So I think they're going to have to concentrate on their core and really hope that they can, as I say, retain at least official party status. Because if not, there'll be some broke-ass NDPers sitting as independents in the House of Commons.
Well, as we record this, John, you'll be interested to know I just saw the notification pop up on my iPad here. I subscribe to the Curse of Politics podcast. Want to know what their headline is this morning?
Sure.
They're going to buy your T-shirt. Do you believe the polls? That's going to be the conversation going into this debate period.
Did you believe them in January? Is the question.
Well, right. No. So, but here's my question to you, John. Though, is around the polling, and I consistently hear, the media talk about, well, things are tightening up and things are getting closer and things. You know what? When you look at all the polls, there isn't really a whole lot of variation. Poll to poll, maybe David Coletto at Abacus was maybe the most remarkable one I saw in the last week, where he had Tories and Liberals tied 39 points each about a week ago.
Yeah.
And now, yesterday, he popped out his poll, and there was about a 6-point spread. So David seems to be the only one where there was a real movement that way. But all the other ones, if you take them, again, all together, there's not a lot of movement there. And I find that the media reporting, particularly when they have an official pollster working in their camp, it really kind of skews the message that in fact, there was some gain there. But to your point, and you've made it often, the Conservatives would have to be ahead 4 or 5 points nationally to have a hope of winning.
Let me address that just briefly, because I've never seen so many polls put out in my lifetime. There's about 14 companies, some dubious, others very reputable. There's different kinds of methodologies, but we've had, I think at last count, over 65 polls since election day started. And what's happening in this race is a few things. Number one, we're now seeing what's called herding, where they start to all kind of head in the same direction. Now, I mean, you can argue that some of them put thumb weights down, so they move in that direction. You can say that the populace is solidifying in the methodologies. Who the heck knows? I can't even answer that. But that's what we're seeing. So you're right. Innovative Research and David Coletto at Abacus have been kind of the outliers in how close this is of a race, but now it's starting to tip over and be with the rest of them. The second thing is that we've got to a situation in the media, and I'm not going to name names, but we've got one particular media outlet that's actually in all across the country that's doing rolling polls every night. Okay, so everybody here has been used to polling, and if you're doing a 500 sample every night, the margin of error on that is about 4.5 to 5 points, which means that you can get fluctuations every night with that amount. And how they do it is they take 3 nights, 500, 500, 500. They roll them up, and they average them, and that's the number you hear the next morning. And as they go forward to the extra 500, the other one drops off the back. You're actually given a little bit of a weight for every time you take it. So the latest one might have a 70% weight. The one behind that might have a 20% weight, and the one behind that might have 10. But nonetheless, you're looking at a margin of error that's really quite significant. So here's where we've got to. Every night you do this, the next morning, the media expect some kind of a report of what's going on. So one night you've got 34, 38. The next night you've got 34, 37. Well, what does that say? Well, they're tightening up. Or what you're doing is you're looking down into your toolbox and you say, oh my goodness, we see them moving up in British Columbia. Oh my God, the margin of error in British Columbia is 8.5 points to 10 points. So all of a sudden you're going, well, they've moved up 3 points, and that's where it's tightening up. But we've got into this cycle now where, and it is happening, Main Street and a couple of others are doing the same thing, where we've been forced now to think about, for the daily newscast, what is going on with the polls. And if you step back from it, not much has changed. I mean, I was talking to Deb Hutton a couple of days ago in the afternoon and on News Talk 1010. And I mean, much the same question. You kind of step back from it and say, look, the average here is 34, 38 with a bit of margin on both sides. Nothing has really changed. What has changed is a solidification to get the vote out. That is the Liberals' basic problem. The second thing that's changed is the character of who people are voting for, and that has changed. It's gone up and the other one's gone down. But the polls really haven't changed that much. So I think a lot of this, I'm not blaming the media. It just is what it is. But we've got into this caterpillaring of polling every night with a large margin of error, trying to find what's going on down below. And what we're finding is not much movement really, but trying to generate a story, because every day it's either more, less, sideways, upward, downwards. And it's not helping unless you can actually stand back and look at it generally over the course of a week.
Dave, can I just make one little point? When I was at the Canadian Press for most of my career, we would not have touched a national poll with a survey size of 500. Ontario polls, maybe. A national poll, not a chance. That's nowhere near a large enough sample size. But you can explain better to me how on a rolling nightly average you don't need that. I don't know.
Well, what they're actually doing is they're making their prediction on 1,500. So what they're doing is they're doing 500 a night, and then rolling that into a sample of 1,500. See what I'm saying?
Yep. Okay.
You can get a fluctuation on. So part of this is to say you do that so that the spikes are smooth. So if you went out on a particular day and it was a big thing going on and it spiked up or down, you avoid that by having the smoothing over the 3 nights, and it's weighted in a particular way. But to constantly be on it, even with a 1,500 sample every night, and kind of have to come on the next day and say, well, it's up, you would.
But that night's only a 500 sample, right? That one night's only a 500 sample.
That's right. And so what could happen?
Rolled in with the others, I get it, but
here's the issue. They would talk about the 1,500, but within any given night you have an up and down. And what we're seeing here is, even on a 1,500 sample, it's a 2.5% margin of error. So you're going to run a margin of error. Even within the margin of error, if I'm 44% one night, 38% the next, and they squeeze by 1 point, what's the narrative? They're tightening up. I mean, we're not seeing anything the next night. It's wider open. We're playing the margins. They're looking for a story. The methodology is fine. It's just trying to interpret where things are going. I think it's not doing a right service. I think overall, let me put it this way. As I said to Deb, it's a little bit like getting blood tests from the doctor, right? And nowadays you can actually go on your own portal and see all the results from your blood test. And when I open it up, sometimes I see all these bing, bing, bings alerts, right? Like it's kind of like, he's over, he's one point over and stuff like that. And it's like, oh my God. I start to Dr. Google, and I've stopped doing all that, but you start to Dr. Google and you assess, oh my God, I'm blood pressure. It must be my potassium level's too high. So like that. You get to the doctor, they look at the report, and they go, yeah, whatever. It's kind of like, what do you mean? It's within the range. It's kind of like, you have nothing to worry about. You're all really healthy. Go home and have a nice, and that's kind of what we're into now, where we're seeing this, all of a sudden the potassium level is up 2 points. And it's kind of like, oh my God, I'm going to have a heart attack. And it's like the doctor gets you and goes, have a nice vacation. That's great. You're off your meds. I think that's where we are with reporting the polls.
So I'm so glad you used that example, John, because I don't do that. I don't go and look at my own tests because it just makes me crazy. And as this conversation's going on, I can feel the knot in my stomach tightening. I just want to go out, get some literature, and knock on a door to calm myself down.
That's your remedy? That's your remedy?
That is my remedy. Absolutely. That is what makes me feel better. Like, don't just please make it stop the analysis of the numbers. Let me talk to a human being.
Correct.
And then, and that's really, it's interesting. We're having these conversations. We listen to the media, but what's going on in every riding across the country is people are taking that literature, they're going and having conversations with human beings, and that is the most beautiful thing. That is the best thing about an election. Yes, the big strategy and the air war, all of that is so critical, and it determines what we're saying at the door and what's in the literature. But oh man, I really never wanted my volunteers to spend a lot of time listening to this stuff, because it can be so demotivating, and you want people to feel enthusiastic.
So, Tim, let's pick up on the medical metaphor, and how do you inoculate then your campaign workers from that? Because there was a day when we might have had a poll a week, and that's going back some time. But to John's point, like 65 freaking polls since we, got into the writ period. That's insane. Your team can't. It doesn't matter what team you're on. You can't avoid seeing those numbers right now. You'd have to be living in a cave under a rock, and that's not where you want your team to be.
It's an excellent point, and that is not easy. So you motivate with what you believe in, particularly appealing, I would say, for conservatives backing Poilievre. They can be motivated just to fight for issues that really get them off their feet. Secondly, you will always send to your potential voters, your volunteers, the most positive spin possible. And they'll see the outside polls. It'll impact on morale, but you still tell a good story to motivate them on what you're fighting for and to sort of lay out a path to victory. The biggest challenge really is caucus and candidates. And I have an expression that caucus is they're with you, win or tie. And so probably what's happening right now is lots of calls in saying, we got a reverse strategy, toss this out. Why aren't you listening to me? So caucus management, to keep them focused, because that spills into their local campaigns. It's actually the biggest challenge.
Yeah. So Kathleen's remedy is to get a bunch of folders and brochures and start knocking on doors and doorknob hangers and so on. What's your stress relief at this point in the campaign?
I'm not stressed.
I don't think I've ever seen Tim stressed.
Bring in business or council public affairs. So yeah, I'm actually looking forward to being there in Ottawa for the dual conventions. I like that stuff, and I'll get a bit more of a view then for sort of the hardcore and where they're at. But my remedy as a leader or as an MPP is just focus on what you can do to deliver on what the plan is. And I'm the same as Premier Wynne. Like, if you have that voter contact as a candidate or as a campaigner, it just helps to set, your feet. You get out some energy, and then you tend to get some positive reinforcement. So our bottom line advice on any campaign to candidates: get out there and do what you're supposed to do. Knock on doors and have the plan in place to drag every vote to the polls.
And get those marks on the page. Dave, the targets in a particular campaign are not about the big national effort. They're about how many votes are we going to have to pull on E-Day. And that number is critical in every one of those campaigns across the country. That's what the volunteers and the campaign managers are focused on.
And the other thing, Dave, is I would be very personal for a moment and say that in the last 48 hours, I've decided to go off of X. I'm done. And the reason is because you can go down rabbit holes. And you can, part of this is that we're supposed to be influencers and going and, understanding things. But I really think that we've also started to look too much at what's going on there. I know all the campaign people. I know, whether you're Fred Bellori on one side or Warren Kinsella on the other side. Like everybody's out there saying their stuff. The algorithms are kicking in. There is, I think, again, we're at a stage here where even the experts themselves, if you can call them that, are caught in this din that's going around and around, and they're campaigning against each other online and in the social media. And I'm not, and I know that Facebook is big for so many people. My in-laws live in the Ottawa Valley, and every morning they get up with their iPad and go through and see everything that's going on, and they're exposed to the advertising. But I really do think that even within the last week, where we've had all of this about President Trump and what's happened south of the border, unplugging for a period of time is a very healthy thing. Because to what's being said here right now, going and talking to your friends, going to talking to other people, having a sit down with somebody and saying, what do you think about what's going on, as opposed to getting informed from all of these other sources, I think that's really important to do.
Yeah, just for
Even
the record,
families,
I'm on Blue Sky Social, just in case you guys, I've kind of weaned off the X thing, and it's interesting, Keith, how much more civil the conversation is. It's the same kind of format, but to John's point, you're not down the rabbit hole.
I switched over to Blue Sky a little while ago as well, and I find that as you say, it's a bit more civil conversation. I seem to be getting a lot more of it must be my age, foreign women looking to date me. Way more than I get on Twitter. Maybe I'm visiting the wrong website. I'm not sure what's behind all that.
The company you keep. Jeez.
It is a more civil.
Can you blame them? Can you blame them? Right?
No, it's understandable.
No, but media celebrities, that's what happens. To
the point of John's point about Twitter, though, when Twitter first hit the scene, and it was basically mostly political reporters, and I felt that we were all like this 2009, 2000, we were drinking our own bathwater almost. It was just really just circular, it was just going around the same groups. And then it expanded. It became, remember when Twitter started, it was a lot like Facebook. It was a lot of college and university kids. Boom. Then it became a real good, solid place to get news, to get both sides, to get all sides. But then, of course, the algorithm started working, and since Musk turned it into X, and the algorithm seemed to be negatively amped up and just driving all the crazy stuff. The stuff I see on there sometimes is just insane. But it's still a platform where I still like to see what people have to say. I know enough to filter an awful lot of it, but I still find it's about, because Blue Sky just doesn't have enough people on it. And someone posted yesterday on the App Store that X is still like number 1 or number 2, and Blue Sky is not even on the top 10 list.
Yeah,
it's just so it's a marginal place. I also signed up to Threads early on. I think I posted twice, and that it's sort of petered. But people are desperate for an alternative to X/Twitter, but I don't think it really exists yet. I do Blue Sky, but it just doesn't seem to. And of course, I've got tens of followers there as opposed to several thousands on Twitter. So could be that it's just I don't have the impact I once did. But I find that I still find Twitter quite useful, even if it's to see the crazy stuff, to see how far people are pushing it, to see how far some of my fellow Canadians are going with the Trump stuff. And there's a Nova Scotia exit group, for God's sakes, which I never would have thought I'd see, let alone, Alberta. So I think it's healthy to stay on top of all these things and to see what's there, but it's not necessarily a healthy website. You have to use a lot of your own judgment and filters to make sure you don't buy the crap. But it's, Facebook is worse because all the advertising is there for political stuff, but no news.
Yeah.
The stories can't be there to balance it. That's terrible.
Yeah.
I really think that's the disastrous way for either the government to enforce Facebook with their charges or whatever. But I think that the governments are still spending so much and political parties on Facebook ads, and yet there's no stories there. There's no context. People can go, who is this guy? What are you saying? I can go find him up in a news story and see what's going on. It's not there. I think that's a huge mistake.
Now, let me just add one more thing to that, and that is, if you want to find out what's going on in the United States, and everybody's looking there, there's a few newsletters that count, and there's, the mainstream media. I don't need to go on Twitter to see it. I subscribe to Politico, which is a independent newsletter, there's some stuff showing up there in the last week or so that's absolutely terrifying. I mean, if you get now Homeland Security and IRS has now signed an agreement so that they can share each other's information. There are 341 different things that you can now be monitored on. In the last week, even the New York Times has confirmed that Doge has gone into that area and actually put an AI in it so that they can monitor all of that stuff in terms of all the employees. If they say anything about Trump and if it's all negative, they'll be able to identify them. Like next door is turning into an incredible surveillance state as we're all looking at tariffs. But I didn't find that on Twitter. I mean, you could see it. So there are reputable parts of the United States which are putting out mainstream media, and Politico is a very trusted piece. And if you start looking at that newsletter, I don't need to go on to some of the social medias to be concerned about what's going on there. But what that means is let them do what they're doing and just come back here and look after us. And let's make sure that we've got our own stability. And that's what the world wants to see in Canada.
Yeah, the other one I would subscribe to is Semaphore. They've got some pretty robust stuff. And of course, the Economist. Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes I think they're a little wiggy out there. But anyway, let's leave it at that. That'll do it for this week on The Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Thanks to Keith Leslie, John Wright, Kathleen Wynne, and Tim Hudak. And again, just a reminder, if you are watching on the YouTube, hit the subscribe button. We will land in your inbox with notifications, and not just for this show, but also for Now and Next and Politically Speaking. And keep an eye on your podcast app for the Arctic Edge. So we're launching that one this week, and it will, I think, going to turn into something rather timely in terms of all the conversation about the need for minerals, the need for mining, how do we do that properly, but also around Arctic sovereignty, and that's on the way from Story Studio Network. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks for being here. I'm Dave Trafford. This is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast.
I have a YouTube channel right here, as you can all people see. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content. Look at this. Bye now.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.